So it's really important for viewers to understand that the Constitution directs the states to administer elections, and every state has different laws with regards to election administration. Maine has a process, and as far as I understand, it is unique in its process in that the legislature passed a law that requires me as secretary to ensure that no candidate placed on the presidential primary ballot that every candidate meets the qualifications of office. And furthermore, under Maine law, if a registered Maine voter wishes to challenge the qualifications of any candidate for office, they cannot go directly to court. They must bring that challenge to the Secretary of State, and I, under the law, was required to hold a hearing within 5 days of the challenge and required to hold and issue a decision. I could not and did not have the discretion to decline to issue a ruling within 5 days of the conclusion of the hearing proceedings. It's important to understand that an administrative hearing under Maine's Administrative Procedure Act and in terms of implementing election law is different than a criminal proceeding in a criminal court. The standard is preponderance of the evidence, and furthermore, part of the hearing record, and my decision was based exclusively on the record before me, is not only live testimony that is subject to cross-examination, but also exhibits that are produced and submitted by the parties. And in fact, in this situation, there were thousands of pages of exhibits which I reviewed, including the bipartisan January 6th report, a bipartisan Senate report, a GAO report, a Defense Department report. So there was substantial evidence that complied with the Maine Administrative Procedure Act submitted in this proceeding that was subject to my review, and my decision was based solely on the facts before me at the hearing and on the Constitution and the rule of law. And it's part of a process here in our state that now goes to Superior Court and then potentially to the Maine Supreme Judicial Court and then potentially to the U.S. Supreme Court. I encourage everyone to read the decision. It is available on the Maine Secretary of State website. I encourage people to read it carefully and understand that the decision is made in accordance with Maine law, the Maine Administrative Procedure Act, and the requirements set forth by the Constitution, and my obligation to uphold the Constitution and Maine election law. And these decisions are decisions election officials make every day across the country in terms of ballot access. Now in Maine, the legislature has specifically directed me to ensure that every candidate on a primary ballot meets the qualifications of office. Now, in 2022, for example, I held a similar hearing on the issue of qualifications for a district attorney candidate. Just a few weeks ago, I barred Mr. Chris Christie from Maine's presidential primary ballot because he failed to submit sufficient signatures. That went to Superior Court, and my decision was upheld. Now, this decision was certainly a more complex question of law and fact, and yet it was something I was required, indeed obligated to do under Maine law. And that's what's so important. Rule of law, the Constitution, that is supreme in our country. It's really important. Every elected official swears an oath to the Constitution. I swore an oath to the Maine Constitution and the United States Constitution. And Maine election law requires me to hold a hearing of this sort. Now, Mr. Trump could, of course, have produced witnesses. Should he have chosen to do so, he did not. That being said, my decision was based exclusively on the record before me in that hearing in accordance with Maine law. That is my sole obligation, and I could make no other consideration. Now, I do really appreciate that Senator King also made a comment in his statement that I did what I was required to do by the law. I didn't have an option of declining to hold that hearing or delaying or not issuing a decision. It was my obligation as Secretary of State. I take that responsibility very seriously. And keep in mind, the events of January 6th were an attack not just on the Capitol, not just on government officials, the former Vice President, members of Congress. It wasn't just an attack in which 7 people lost their lives. It was an attack on the peaceful transfer of power. And the evidence submitted at the hearing demonstrated that it happened at the behest of and with the knowledge and support of the outgoing president, Mr. Trump.